Alternate history doesn't need to be about wars, battles, elections, or great men. It can be about social changes that are rarely decided in one epic confrontation. In fact, depending on the culture or time period, any societal change can be reversed. The truth is, much of social history is a constant, unending battle to protect individual freedom and liberty that others would just as happily take away for reasons. So sorry, but this video isn't about kings, generals, or presidents, but just people and what they might have done differently if a certain United States Supreme Court decision went a different way. Hello everyone, I'm Matt Mitrovich, the alternate historian, and I'm about to destroy my comment section. Let's talk about the history of abortion in America. Let's begin by dispelling some common myths about the history of abortion in America. To be clear, abortion isn't anything new, and American women were permitted to terminate pregnancies under common law during the colonial and post-independence eras. At the time, the law limited abortions to before quickening. No, not that kind of quickening. In this context, quickening means the time when the fetus starts moving, which happens around 15 to 20 weeks of a pregnancy. So early American women could have an abortion before this period, although later abortions did happen. However, a better understanding of fetal development, coupled with medical doctors wanting to eliminate abortion providers, who usually weren't doctors in the 19th century, led to changes in abortion laws. In 1821, Connecticut became one of the first states to pass a law banning post-quickening abortions. As the years went on, more states, exclusively governed by white men, adopted rules regarding abortion, including bans on pre-quickening abortions. Even feminists of the 19th and early 20th century, like Susan B. Anthony or Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, were either against abortion or else saw it as a necessary evil that wouldn't be needed once real reforms for women were enacted. In fact, proponents of abortion during this time were more likely to be advocates of population control who feared unchecked population growth would destroy society, racists who wanted to limit the population of non-whites, or eugenicists who wanted to rid humanity of anyone they deemed undesirable. And yet, opponents of abortion made no effort to make common cause with feminists. People like 19th century anti-vice activists and America's greatest buzzkill, Anthony Comstock, blamed feminists for many of society's ills, which included abortion and contraception. By 1900, every state had laws governing abortion, mostly banning it and making it a crime to have or even perform one. And yet this didn't stop women from getting abortions. Some states carved out exceptions in cases of rape, incest, or to save a woman's life, but these were probably only a small fraction of the abortions being performed. The 2006 Oxford Companion to United States History stated that by the 1930s, around 800,000 abortions were performed every year. How many of these abortions were safe and or legal is questionable. Wealthy women could afford to travel to places where abortion was legal, or at the very least could buy the anonymity, while poorer women had to seek out alternative and less safe options. This inequality, along with stories of women dying from illegal abortions, galvanized women's rights activists to change the laws. By the 1960s and early 70s, feminists saw legalized abortions as necessary to help women gain access to the workforce. Feminists organized groups to help women travel to places where abortion was available. Planned Parenthood, an organization originally founded to provide birth control to women, it was initially opposed to abortion, organized one of the first professional conferences to propose reforms to abortion laws. Women began to talk more openly about the plight of those forced to be pregnant, and public opinion began to shift. New exceptions were made to state abortion bans, or early-term bans were struck down entirely. Of course, there was backlash to this new attitude toward abortion, especially among the Catholic Church, which should be noted only officially banned abortions in 1869, and new pro-life organizations were formed to combat this pro-choice movement. And then Roe v. Wade happened. The case began when Norma McCorvey, known to history as Jane Roe, became pregnant in 1969 with her third child. Unable to have an abortion due to Texas's restrictions on it, Norma, through her attorneys Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey, filed a suit against the state alleging the Texas abortion law was unconstitutional. Then in 1973, in a 7-2 vote, the United States Supreme Court, in an opinion drafted by Justice Harry Blackmun, ruled in McCorvey's favor, stating that the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution allows pregnant women to have an abortion regardless of the reason. This wasn't an absolute right, and the court did allow states to put restrictions on the ability of women to have an abortion, especially in the second and third trimesters of a pregnancy. Nevertheless, the decision classified abortion as a right protected by the Constitution. However, due to how slow cases move through the federal legal system, Norma ended up having the baby, which she put up for adoption. Kind of ironic when you think about it. The woman responsible for ultimately making abortion a constitutionally protected right in America never actually got to have one. And while future Supreme Court decisions, like Planned Parenthood v. Casey, would revise the rules around abortion, and certain state governments would do everything they could to keep abortions de facto illegal, it certainly seemed that Roe v. Wade was settled law until recently. You see, Roe v. Wade was a controversial opinion, to say the least. Now, at first, this opposition wasn't partisan. In the years following Roe, anti- or pro-abortion voters could be found in either America's political parties. But as time went by, the opposition or support of abortion began to coalesce under specific parties. Abortion opponents, with the core being conservative Christians believing personhood begins at conception, engaged in a decades-long campaign to see Roe overturned, and the Republicans quickly became their champions. The Republicans had already become increasingly socially conservative due to white Southerners joining due to Democratic support for civil rights, outreach to evangelical Christians, and the rise of thinkers like William F. Buckley and others. And this conservative cocktail brought in a lot of unethical to pants-on-head crazy supporters. For example, there are the conspiracy theorists who will say things like, aborted fetuses are used to power street lamps. That was actually said, under oath, in front of Congress. And of course, there are those who downplay school shootings because abortion happens. I'm reminded of what the late, great George Carlin once said about the anti-abortion crowd.
Boy, these conservatives are really something, aren't they? They're all in favor of the unborn. They will do anything for the unborn. But once you're born, you're on your own.
Meanwhile, pro-abortion activists had nowhere to go but the Democrats. Now, to be fair, the Democrats have worked to protect Roe, but it's been a half-hearted or at least inconsistent effort. Some presidents, like Jimmy Carter or Joe Biden, have admitted they are personally opposed to abortion but still swear to protect it. But in spite of this flaky protection, Roe remains accepted, if unpopular, among Americans, with polls showing majority wanting to keep abortion legal. There is still a lot of disagreement over what kind of restrictions, if any, should be applied. However, evidence suggests that the number of women getting abortions has actually decreased since 1980, although this may be due to the increased availability, for now, of birth control. But then on May 2nd, 2022, a draft majority opinion in the Supreme Court case of Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization was leaked. Written by Justice Samuel Alito, the draft seemed to indicate that the court was about to overturn Roe. Now, while it's not unusual for there to be multiple draft majority opinions that can be heavily revised before one is officially released, it certainly seems like the right to an abortion will no longer be a constitutionally protected right in America. And there is legit fear that other rights, like the right to contraception, gay marriage, or any form of bodily autonomy, might be on the chopping block if the far right gets its way. Nevertheless, this would essentially take America back to almost 50 years ago, when most abortions in the first trimester were illegal. But what if abortions were never a constitutionally protected right to begin with? What if Roe lost her Supreme Court case? What would happen next? It's not impossible to imagine. Initially, the Supreme Court wanted to hear Roe in order to determine whether questions on state laws, like abortion bans, should even be heard in federal courts. So in this alternate timeline, the Supreme Court decides not to use Roe as an opportunity to make abortion a constitutionally protected right, and instead uses it to clarify a jurisdictional issue. Or alternatively, the court might decide only Texas's abortion law needs to be fixed, but otherwise would not overturn abortion restrictions elsewhere. To be clear, not making abortions a constitutionally protected right would not mean abortions would be entirely illegal in the United States. Instead, individual states would continue to decide whether or not to make it legal. So in this alternate history, only in Alaska, California, Hawaii, New York, Washington, and the District of Columbia would abortion remain legal. Some states, however, would have exceptions, such as how Texas allowed abortion to save a woman's life. Meanwhile, the women's movement, having failed to achieve a sweeping Supreme Court victory, would probably stick to campaigning to liberalize abortion laws in a state-by-state basis. In fact, some liberal critics of Roe have argued this is the preferred way to secure abortion rights. As years went by, other states might loosen abortion restrictions. Maine, Connecticut, Maryland, and New Mexico are good candidates because in our timeline, they are some of the few states that have laws or state constitution amendments that maintain the legality of abortions should Roe be overturned. Meanwhile, abortion activists would continue to help women travel to places where abortion was safe and legal, or else get access to abortion-inducing medication. Presumably, the anti-abortion movement would oppose them, as we know they existed pre-Roe. They would campaign to keep abortion bans in place and overturn legal abortions in other states. We could even see laws passed to prevent women from getting out-of-state abortions, which is something that is happening in our timeline. For example, some states propose to punish citizens for traveling out-of-state to get an abortion, to extradite out-of-state providers of abortion pills, or punish employers who pay travel expenses so their employees can get an abortion. Back in the alternate timeline, pro-abortion states could retaliate by passing their own laws protecting their citizens from being extradited to other states. In an effort to enforce their laws, however, anti-abortion states might encourage bounty hunters to track women who flee their home state, or abortion providers who help them, much like the fugitive slave hunters of antebellum America. Okay, I'm not necessarily saying that abortion will lead to a civil war like slavery did. However, if you really want to drive a wedge between the states, just imagine some heavily armed Texan driving to New York City to hunt women or doctors. Because violence is always an option for the alleged pro-life movement. This isn't a crazy idea since in our timeline some anti-abortion advocates have resorted to bombing abortion clinics or killing providers. The 1996 bombing of the Atlanta Olympics, in which 2 people died and 111 were injured, was also done in protest against abortion. So, like a modern-day bleeding Kansas, terroristic violence may happen in order to prevent states from legalizing abortion or force them to ban it. In the midst of all this, some American politicians might try something to alleviate the tension. In fact, we could see the Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA, actually get passed in this timeline. In our timeline, the ERA was a proposed amendment to the Constitution that would have banned discrimination on the basis of sex. Although originally introduced in 1923, it was reintroduced in 1971. After being approved by Congress, it went to the state legislatures, and due to popular support among both Democrats and Republicans, it seemed destined to be ratified. That is, until conservative backlash led by Serena Joy wannabe Phyllis Schlafly stalled the process, and eventually not enough states ratified it before the deadline imposed by Congress passed. But here's the thing. While there were many reasons people opposed the ERA, one reason was the fear that the amendment would be interpreted as guaranteeing a woman's right to an abortion. Some present-day supporters of the ERA have even suggested the amendment as a way of protecting those rights in light of America's current conservative Supreme Court. So maybe in this alternate timeline, the anti-abortion movement doesn't get a shot in the arm due to the Roe decision, and the opposition to the ERA is unable to prevent its ratification. Then, in a bit of historical irony, the Supreme Court in this alternate history still has to settle the abortion debate, but this time they would do so with a whole new amendment to consider. But I don't want to spend all this video talking about politics, because, to be frank, Roe v. Wade had a major impact on the lives of women in America, literally half the population, and a different decision would have major ramifications to women's history. In this alternate America, it's important to remember that unplanned pregnancies would still happen. In our timeline, post-Roe states where abortions were banned saw a 4.5% decline after Supreme Court decision. But in this alternate timeline, that birth rate wouldn't drop. Thousands of women who would have otherwise had an abortion would be forced to become a parent. It's hard, however, to put an exact number on this. According to a 2017 study, 1 in 4 women in the United States will have an abortion by the time they are 45, even if they have or will later go on to have children. A 2019 study also suggests that if Roe were overturned now, 90,000 to 140,000 women could be prevented from having an abortion. Still, that's a lot of women over the last 50 years who would be forcibly kept pregnant. Many of these women might not feel ready to be a parent or be a parent again, either because they are too young, trying to get an education or a career, or simply can't afford it. And these women wouldn't be guaranteed a loving partner and or supportive family to help raise an unexpected child. Childcare and healthcare are expensive in America, and there is no guaranteed paid leave for parents. Sure, adoption is a possibility, but you would still need to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term and then recover from said pregnancy, all with the hope that someone will take the child from you and they wouldn't become lost in the foster system. And let's be honest, this is the best case scenario for an unwanted pregnancy. Some pregnancies are the result of rape or an abusive relationship, or are dangerous for the mother, or the child itself might not survive to be born. These reasons for getting an abortion don't go away in a timeline without Roe. So in this alternate timeline, women who need to get an abortion in 1973 and after, but reside in a state where it's illegal, would either need to travel out of state or seek out illegal providers. How safe these procedures would be is questionable. Some women may even attempt self-abortion methods learned from less reputable sources, and God forbid what will happen once the internet starts to get involved. It's hard to know for sure how many women died from botched abortions since the information we have is out of date, but some estimates put it in the thousands per year. We could see many more women dying or needing to be treated because of unsafe abortions, and those who survive might find themselves arrested, fined, and or imprisoned. So in an attempt to be pro-life, America could be sending thousands of women to their death. Of course, it's more likely these women would keep the children, but this reality comes with its own cost, primarily for the mother. According to many economists, there is a causal link between abortion legalization and women having better opportunities for getting an education, entering the workforce, and earning prestige positions in society. Working mothers also tend to be paid less, which means more women in America could be living in poverty or be dependent on their partners and or families. Although given the attitude of some conservatives who think women shouldn't be in the workforce, this would be considered a good way to keep women at home for people on the right. Nevertheless, young women, poor women, and or women of color would especially have it harder in this alternate America. In 2014, almost half of all abortions in our timeline were attained by poor women. Women of color are also more likely to have unwanted pregnancies, and because of a lack of access to health care, these pregnancies are more dangerous. We also see many more teen mothers who put off college, or even teen brides, which is shockingly something many American conservatives support due to their opposition to raising the legal age to marry. So in this alternate America, women on average would be worse off than they are in our timeline. And we can't ignore the toll to a woman's mental and physical well-being when forced to carry an unwanted pregnancy and even raise the child. The Turnaway study shows women who are denied abortion are more likely to suffer anxiety, have low self-esteem, are less likely to meet their life goals, and, even if they give the child up for adoption, still have to deal with health problems and the cost of treating them that sometimes come after a pregnancy. Children born in this alternate America will also be generally worse off. To be fair, many of these children from unwanted pregnancies could be raised in loving homes either by their birth mother, who may or may not have a partner, other family members, or adoptive parents, but many others could be subject to neglect and abuse. Many will live in poverty with little chance of attending college and even greater chance of being in government assistance or the foster care system, assuming either is properly funded and the departments managing it are properly staffed. What profound effects this will have on the culture of, say, Generation X is anyone's guess, but we can plausibly say it would be a far larger generation and might be known more for being angry at the injustices of life than being do-nothing slackers. Granted, this situation for women in this alternate America might be improved indirectly. For example, we could see Congress act to increase access to contraception in order to make abortions unnecessary in an effort to find some kind of compromise between the pro and anti-abortion states, especially in a timeline where the ERA doesn't get passed. Meanwhile, former President Jimmy Carter and others have suggested in our timeline certain reforms to make it less likely women would feel the need to get an abortion, such as a public health care option, funding for affordable childcare, and guaranteed parental leave. Oh right, that isn't going to happen. So yeah, not a great alternate history for American women, or America in general for that matter. And what's worse, this might be our future. So what now? Let's be honest. Anti-abortion activists worked patiently for decades to shape the political makeup of the Supreme Court to get this result. And they won't stop there. Since the Dobbs leak, leaders on the right have criticized or called for the overturn of cases that gave us the right to contraception, especially since certain right-wingers consider many birth control drugs as abortion-inducing. Already it's predicted that in many states, IUDs and Plan B will become illegal, limiting women's option when it comes to birth control. Additionally, the right to gay marriage or just consensual sex between same-sex partners may be next. I and others have seen people talk about overturning Brown v. Board of Education, the case that ended segregation in America, or Loving v. Virginia, which legalized interracial marriages, which you'd think would be an undesirable outcome for conservative Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and his wife Ginny. And I know I'm saying a lot of crap about the pro-life movement, and if I'm being honest, I personally know many people who are a part of it. They, as individuals, are not bad people and don't want women to suffer, but they still willingly associate themselves with people who do want that, or at the very least have goals that could lead to that. And it's not hysteria to say they want this. They're being honest, so I say, let's believe them. In hindsight, perhaps leaving it up to 9 unelected individuals who serve for life to decide what, if any, rights Americans have under the Constitution was a bad idea. Perhaps the best case scenario was a world where abortion rights were won on a state-by-state basis, changing public opinion to such a point that it would cost politicians their careers not to support abortion rights. In this alternate timeline, maybe we see an equal rights amendment that guarantees women their bodily autonomy in matters of pregnancy, with some reasonable limitations to keep a small but vocal anti-abortion crowd modified. Perhaps this could even be America's future. Then again, maybe that is too optimistic to be plausible. Maybe instead we see an increasingly restless America where inequality is growing as the states squabble in a way not seen since before the slavers rebelled. Personally though, I know which timeline I prefer to live in. Still, maybe Roe v. Wade only delayed the inevitable long fight to secure abortion rights and in turn equal rights between the sexes in America. The good news is that even though history isn't naturally heading towards some progressive utopia, that doesn't mean people can't still strive for such a thing. History shows that while progress can be stalled or even reversed, it can still happen and be preserved if there are people willing to work hard for it. I hold out hope that a lucky break might come America's way, but if not, those who think abortion is a right that should be guaranteed by the Constitution need to be ready for a long fight. Well, that is up to say on the subject. If you enjoy what I do, please like, comment, subscribe, share this video, support me on Patreon. I'm Matt Mitrovich, the Alternate Historian. Bye.